I am super delighted for our next guest here. I get to have a great time interviewing him. Aaron Levie is the CEO of Box. A lot of you may know he dropped out of college in 2005 to start Box. I was very fortunate to get to work with him in 2007, a few years later, get a peek at Box in the early days, which was a lot of fun. And Aaron is one of those rare CEOs who's been able to scale from the very beginning of the company through IPO, for 13 years now and beyond. So it's awesome. He's one of the sharpest people that I know, and he doesn't want me to talk about his Twitter feed, but it's super hilarious. So if you're not following him on Twitter, you gotta check it out. And I'm super excited to talk to him today. He spoke to us at our last summit back in May 2017, so we're gonna hear what he's been up to since then. But please join me in giving a warm welcome to Aaron Levie.
Thank you.
All right, so I'm not going to ask who's heard of Box. I'm sure everybody's heard of Box, but some of you may not know Box's story. So just a quick little summary, short history overview of.
How short are we talking?
Yeah, just a couple minutes, 2-3 minutes.
Okay,
4 minutes. It's all good. It's a fun story.
So we started Box in 2000. We got the idea in 2004, and the idea was really simple. We were running into all these problems around sharing files and accessing files from anywhere. Obviously, kind of really stupid simple idea and problem. If you remember in the late 90s, maybe some of you will know, there were a couple of companies that were trying to solve this problem called online file storage. There's this company called XDrive. Did anybody is like the founder of XDrive in this room? Can I say anything about XDrive? Okay. Did anybody work at XDrive? Did anybody know anybody that worked at XDrive? Okay, good. Oh, you do? Did you actually? Yeah. Wow, who'd you know? Okay, and okay, okay. So we had this. So no, but I mean, it was just wrong place, wrong time kind of situation where like the cost of a hard drive was probably realistically about 1,000 times more expensive than it is today. The internet was 100th of the speed of that it is today, and so you just wrong time in the late 90s to store data online, too inefficient, too cost prohibitive. The user experience wasn't that easy. So fast forward 5 or 6 years later, 2004. Firefox had just sort of come out. The cost of storage was dropping pretty rapidly. Internet was speeding up, and we said, okay, what if there was a really easy way you could access files from anywhere and work from anywhere, and so we launched this idea. It was called Box.net. We rented this domain name for $500 a month and launched this website, and people started signing up. Within literally a few hours of launching. And it was incredible. It was the first time that we had built a website that actually people signed up for. So it was like this new feeling that we had never experienced before. My co-founders and I, we all went to high school together, and we'd gotten really good at launching websites and then shutting them down. Like we had perfected the art of like how do you launch and then shut down a website because nobody signed up. So we launched the site. People started signing up, and are we hearing a audio? Oh yeah, we're doing a time delay. It's probably like routing around the world to come back here. Okay, it's AV in the cloud. This is the problem. Okay, so yeah. Okay, so we're good now. So launched the site. People started signing up, and then we got to a point where enough people were signing up that we decided we had to drop out of college because it was just getting way too hard to do both things. So we moved up to the Bay Area. Moved to Berkeley first and then Palo Alto, and then met this fine gentleman who helped us with improving the product, virality, the business model early on, and then a whole bunch of other things we had to do since then.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right. And just real quick, how was the IPO?
Well, the IPO itself wasn't good, so thank you for asking. But eventually, things got better about that process. So we've done we've kind of literally done every single possible type of thing a startup can do. We've raised too much money. We've had down rounds. We've had up rounds. We've had bridge rounds. We've had loans. We've had every possible like matrix of permutations of what you can do as a company we've gone through. We've had a IPO filing that we had to pull back, and then an IPO filing 9 months later, and we went and through that. But ultimately, it's I think it's been a fun, exciting experience all the while. I'm sure that it's extremely stressful at times. So, but it's been fun.
Well, I chalk it up to you educating the market on SaaS metrics and accounting because they just didn't know what they were
Yeah,
doing,
that's what we told ourselves. You guys just don't get us.
Right.
Like we're just different.
Yeah, exactly.
Even though that wasn't really true. Like Salesforce had already gone public and other people. But I think what we were doing for a little bit of history was we were doing the really, really expensive version of SaaS, which is we were loading up aggressively on sales and marketing at the same time as R&D. And just the two things combined made it very, very expensive. But we did it because, at least in our case, we knew that from an economics, the model allowed us to acquire a customer, and we knew that they would stay with us for many, many more years because, fortunately, if you help a customer manage and secure their data, they tend to be relatively sticky, assuming you're making them successful. So we knew that it would be wildly profitable to acquire customers, and that there was this window of opportunity. It started around 2010, 2011, where we saw that there was this opportunity where if we didn't strike right then, we would be losing all these customers to a different technology. So we loaded up on venture capital, invested pretty significantly in building all of our go-to-market, building all of our R&D, which meant that by the time we went public and IPO'd, we were showing a lot of losses. But it was because we were ultimately acquiring customers that we thought were going to stay with us for a really long time.
Cool.
So,
all right, cool. So I know you think a lot about core principles. Yeah. And last time we spoke, we talked about some of the top product principles you think about. So what are some top of mind principles that you think about for product, the relevant to product leader audience as far as when they're thinking about the product?
Yeah, so I think, and this sort of pertains to the history of the company. So when we dropped out and we moved to Palo Alto and we started. We raised a Series A, and the Series A was $1.5 million, and that was just enough to kind of get us maybe 18 months of runway. So we had kind of 18 months starting in 2006 to figure out what the business was going to look like. We were super scrappy team, maybe 10 people at the time. By the time the Series A came in, we had 5 actually at first, and then we hired a few folks. And so we had 18 months to figure out what the business was going to be. And throughout that period, we sort of meandered between a more consumer-leaning company, a more enterprise-leaning company. I personally, for a while, wanted to stay consumer. I thought that was sort of the mission of the company. That was why we started the product. We wanted to solve problems for end users. I had a co-founder, and then we had some early employees that said, no, you got to go enterprise. This is the only viable business model that we would have. One of our investors sort of really encouraged us in that direction. So we got to this juncture about 12 months into really the more serious era of Box in 2007, where we said, okay, we have to either be an enterprise software company or a consumer company, and we had to make a call of which way we wanted to go. And so when we studied that decision, the key was we ultimately realized that in the consumer space, our market was going to be rapidly commoditized. Big companies like Google, Facebook, others were going to give away storage for free, infinite amounts of data storage because they had business models that would really align to doing that. And in the enterprise market, we could actually be this disruptive technology that could go and actually be more of the disruptive innovation in more of the classic enterprise software and infrastructure categories, document management, collaboration software, storage infrastructure, et cetera. So we didn't know it at the time, but if you now read like Innovator's Dilemma, we were almost like a perfect case study of Innovator's Dilemma for legacy enterprise software in content management and collaboration. So it was this idea of something that was this low-end disruption. It looked too simple to really matter to enterprises. It didn't seem like it was going to solve the really hardcore industrial strength problems. But what it was doing, it was peeling off the customers that were being overserved by traditional enterprise software. So it would peel off the marketing teams of Procter & Gamble and the teams where something like SharePoint or Documentum or traditional enterprise software was overserving that customer base. It was too complex, too hard to use, et cetera. So we said, okay, we're doing this. We didn't know it at the time, but we were doing this low-end disruption. And we said, okay, this is sort of our route into the enterprise where we're never going to have as many salespeople as the big incumbents. So we're not going to have as much distribution. But there might be a different turning point in this model, which is if you focus on the user, you come into the enterprise via the user. This was sort of right when consumerization of IT was starting to happen. If we come in through the user, then we could actually sort of surround the IT organization, prove that there'd be enough value in using our software, and then we could go and sell an enterprise instance or license to that customer. And so that was the original theory when we decided to pivot to the enterprise market. And along with that, we said, okay, if we're going to become an enterprise software company in terms of our business model, how do we retain the strengths and the ethos of more of a consumer-oriented product company? And because we knew that was sort of our core differentiation. We come in through the user. We build software that users hopefully enjoy using and make them successful. But then our business model is to sell enterprise technology from an IT, security, compliance, data governance standpoint. And that was ultimately when we've been basically doing that for the past 10 plus years, is this living right at this intersection of software designed for the user, but basically built and sold to the enterprise. And that has effectively designed driven our core product principles over the past decade, which is first and foremost, everything we design has to be done through a consumer oriented mindset in terms of the designers we hire, the PMs we hire, the ways that we think about innovation, the way that we think about A/B testing. All of these things would look a lot more like if you worked at a consumer technology company or a product company as opposed to a classic enterprise software company. It helps that we've never had to sort of rebuild the platform and move it from on-prem to the cloud, so we've always been cloud first. So that meant that the moment we wanted to start to do A/B testing in our features, we had the ability to do A/B testing in our features, and then we could decide which features we wanted to roll into the core product. We could we had analytics about every single action and activity happening on our products. We got a lot of sort of kind of quote unquote things for free because of the early architecture decisions, the fact that we were a sort of a cloud native enterprise software company. But what we've done is mostly studied and learned from the consumer companies around how do you build products, how do you innovate, how do you drive user experience. And so if you come to our engineering product data teams, we look basically just like a consumer company, but we happen to sell to an enterprise. And that's sort of how we've tried to hold up our principles over the past decade.
Cool. So you've used that kind of consumer mindset as a differentiator.
Yeah.
Awesome. Cool. I know within enterprise, it's we were talking about this earlier. It's hard, especially for startups when they're trying to do enterprise sales, and customers are saying, "Hey, yeah, well, here's what we want," to just turn down the revenue, not chase the revenue when there's not a good strategic fit. So it's really hard to say no. And I know that part of what has helped you with Box is being able to say no.
Yeah.
And I know you're a fan of not letting customers tell you what to build, and you like jobs to be done and things like that. So can you share some advice for people out there that are feeling like they can't say no? How do we say no, and what are some advice on to
first of all, start your own company.
Yes.
And then you can kind of say no whenever you want. That's the fastest path. If you just want the fastest path to being able to say no to requests. But I think it's super tricky in the enterprise. Maybe just so I understand kind of everybody in the room, who's doing an enterprise software startup? Okay. Who's doing a consumer internet startup? And then the people that didn't raise their hand, I assume, is just Bitcoin related stuff. Is that the gap?
Chatbots.
Oh, chatbots. Yeah. Okay, fine. So spanning the two worlds. So
ML, deep learning, Okay,
of course. There. I mean, obviously, anything Bitcoin related would also be ML. I'm sure tied to that. So ML Bitcoin startup. I know I made fun of at least 3 companies in this room. I apologize. It's really tough. Like everything I just described. It's like what's on the whiteboard of our strategy or what's on our strategy document. The real life version is really freaking hard because like all of the things that you can take for granted as a consumer software company, you don't get to do in the enterprise. Like a really small example that is not like one of our strategic issues, and I'll get to some of the more strategic ones, is like in a consumer company, you can just literally decide when do you want to email your users. You can have different kind of alerts for them. You can send them newsletters. You can do viral growth mechanics. You can try and do win-back campaigns. In the enterprise, those aren't really our users. Those are the users of the organization. And so if you've built a relationship with a buyer who is not actually they're just representing the user population, you don't get to just communicate to those users like you do as a consumer company. So we have these 1,000 differences that exist when you're an enterprise software company versus a consumer company. So the real test is what things can you actually bring and sort of can you graft in from the consumer world to the enterprise, and which things do you have to think a little bit differently about. So early on, one of the challenges and one of the big issues we ran into was you'd have customers that would come in with incredibly logical feature requests for their specific needs or where they were on their journey of using the cloud. So in our case, it was the really easiest one is most of our customers early on said, I really like Box. It's great for sharing files, et cetera, but I want to be able to run it in an on-premises environment. So I want to be able to run it in my data center. And unfortunately, we had competitors that were willing to say yes to that. We had competitors that were willing to build something that sort of kind of felt like Box, but run it in their data center. And so you can imagine now you're a sales rep, you just joined our company and you sell to the banking industry, and you come back to HQ and you're like, hey, I've got this $5 million opportunity. All I have to do is just be able to, fork the code base and have a customer be able to run it on-prem. And I'm this annoying 23-year-old saying no fucking way. And you're like, well, how am I going to hit my quota? How's this going to work? And that was like we ran into 1,000 of those over the first 10 years of the company, because we were either fighting security teams or IT teams or compliance teams or privacy groups. But what we said was the core principle that we sort of honed in on was we are only going to build things that we felt were aligned to our long-term strategy and focus on the user. And we're not going to do anything that can compromise the user experience or impair the user experience, even if there's a certain degree of amount of dollars on the line for that decision. So if, for instance, having a customer run our service in their own environment would mean that we wouldn't be able to keep that up to date with our latest features and our latest user experiences or our latest integrations, we would say no. If a customer was looking for a small security feature that was going to let the security organization control what kind of data end users could share, and so thus that would mean that we would just be repeating the same problems that the on-premises software created and why people hated the on-prem software so much, then we would say no. And now that meant that only a certain kind of customer base would self-select into our product, because we were basically saying here are the constraints that we have. And so I think there's basically sort of 3 categories of customers that we would deal with. One category we just had to say no to. One category said yes to those constraints. And then there was this middle ground, which is what they're asking for is entirely reasonable. The way that they're describing their ask or the request is going to veer us off our roadmap, but maybe there's a way that we could partner and find a middle ground where we can go to them and say, hey, we can't exactly solve this problem for you in the exact way you're describing or the way you're used to, but we can get you to the same end result. And so you're going to be able to accomplish the same ultimate goal. You're just going to have to think about it differently, and that will let us both solve your ultimate desire, which is to have a great user experience, but be able to solve this additional problem as well. And so we had to, probably about a third of our deals landed in that category, which is you're asking for something entirely reasonable. The specific request of how you're asking us to design it is not going to work. Can we find a middle ground? And that's where being able to just be as open, transparent, collaborative as possible with your customer is incredibly important. And I would say that it's that is what we've tried to do even to this day. And everybody faces their own version of that. The big challenge is if you don't have extreme clarity, if you don't know which things are going to veer you off your roadmap, if you don't know which types of decisions are going to lead to you not ultimately being able to build the right product, that's how bad products ultimately get built. Because then imagine that every time a decision comes up, if you don't really know, is this going to align with our 10-year product vision or product strategy, and you start to kind of accumulate all of these other bad decisions that you have to maintain forever that completely veer you off your course. And that's what we at least were very, very principled about early on.
Yeah, and you have to have that strategy in the first place. A lot of startups, they may not have that clear of a strategy, and revenue's coming at them, so they just say yes because they've got the burn going on.
And I think actually I would say that our strategy wasn't as clear as I would like it to have been, and even today, like we're always sort of like. We always leave a little bit of room where like we're not exactly clear because the market's just changing so rapidly. Like we can't perfectly define all of the things about our product in the future, but where principles are insanely important. If you can be really clear on your principles of like we will not create features that could compromise how the end user is going to interact with our product and let some other third party compromise that user experience, whether it's an IT manager, whether it's a third party partner, then actually you don't have to have all your strategy fully figured out, but you do have to have principles that tell you how to kind of go left or right at each of those decisions.
So it's awesome you're clear on the principles. As you grow and get bigger, how do you make sure everyone in the org or enough people in the org are clear on those principles and you have consistency?
Lots of meetings. Right. Just like literally like we just meet a lot. And I thought like maybe you just put it on posters and then people sort of interpret the posters differently. and then you because like it's not as simple just to say, well, like, put the user first at all times. Because, someone's definition of how I put the user first might be different. Like, we might not have a universal agreement on what that means. We might not have a universal agreement on build APIs for every feature. How many? Do I have to expose every single feature via API? Do I so? We've tried to write down the principles. We've tried to describe them. We've tried to promote them. But ultimately, it's just about making sure that we're meeting constantly, that there's a shared dialogue, that there's both tribal knowledge, but as well as like constantly pushing our own thinking on some of those principles, and then just literally being able to hash it out on a real-time basis, on a per product basis.
Cool. All right. Well, the Box product has clearly grown and evolved over time. And you've gone from a single product to multiple product offerings. Can you talk to us about how you shaped that evolution as people here are going from one product to multiple products? What kind of advice you have for them?
So I'll just tell you what we're doing, because I don't know that we're good enough for me to give advice yet. But so check in like a year, maybe if at this event next year.
Summit, we'll see. Yeah.
You can tell me.
We'll get update.
We can see if
we'll set some OKRs.
Yeah, okay, we'll set an OKR that I'm at advice ready level kind of feedback. But I think for us, what we're doing is so our product strategy has been make it really easy to share, store, collaborate around files, and then we've been building out a bunch of the capabilities surrounding that problem for customers that are sort of our next generation products. So what we've at least learned from other enterprise software companies, especially the ones that we study that are super good at this, is really find whatever the closest adjacencies are to the problems that your customers are going to need to be solving with your product. It's like not that hard to when you think about it, but really getting focused on adjacencies. I think you do see a lot of companies lose their way because they sort of become this grab bag of different technologies or products. So we've tried to be very clear about we have to focus on adjacencies, and the adjacencies are really easy to prioritize because you just look at all of the things that customers are having to work around your product to solve. And that basically becomes your roadmap. Like the things that customers are on a heat map basis telling you your product doesn't solve, so they're finding another solution for, they're building it themselves. That basically becomes the sort of markets to enter. It doesn't necessarily tell you what to build, but it tells you the problems you need to go solve. And so we've just been on a multi-year journey past 3 or 4 years on how do we go into many of these domains and sort of build out the next set of solutions that we can bring to customers.
Cool. All right. So Box started out as the upstart way back in the day. I remember it was like David and Goliath a little bit. You guys had the SharePoint billboards going.
Yeah.
You were worried any day Google was going to launch G Drive,
I'm
right?
sure that PM is in this room, and you've caused much stress in my life, so thank you.
Okay,
yes.
Sorry. Last time we thanked Apple, Google, and Yahoo. Remember
we
that?
did?
Yeah, it was great.
Okay,
It was excellent. All right. So the interesting thing, and you mentioned innovator's dilemma. So how do you think about preventing Box from being disrupted by the next Box?
If only we were in such a glorious position where I was only worried about us being disrupted by somebody else. I think we're still very early on our own journey of sort of fighting the incumbents. When you look at our business, we'll do a little over $600 million in revenue this year. The total addressable market that we think we address is a $30 to $40 billion market. So we're a couple percent of the total size of this market. So most of our time is focused on how do we make sure we continue to fight back the incumbents and the sort of, in many cases, kind of complacency of the market of just like, going with the bigger company solution. So we are not yet that company. So most of our time is trying to stay, keep other companies on their toes. But I think it's all one and the same. Anything that we do to be more disruptive will equally protect us from being disrupted ourselves. It's by making sure that we keep track of and always be thinking about, the companies. Like the essence of disruption is you're no longer solving the customer's problem in a way that is like either affordable or attractive or in a simple enough way, and like that's how disruption works. So as long as we can always make sure that we can't sort of see that there's a better way to solve our problem better than we're solving it, that's how we ultimately avoid it. And that's basically I think in product management, that's job number one of anybody in product management is don't let there be a better solution than your solution for this problem. And so as long as we're doing that, I'd like to think that we can be mostly protected from the kind of disruption that at least we've been able to. I mean, we only existed because the incumbents weren't solving the problem. So our job and all of our jobs are just to solve the customer problem in a better way than anybody else.
Awesomely said.
Yeah.
So cool. Well, with that, let's open it up to some questions for Aaron.
Okay.
Yeah. as a product-centric founder, when you started bringing on your first senior product leaders, head of product, chief product officer, what was that dynamic like? Given that, you're so product centric, and
Yeah.
did you have to go through multiple rounds of product people to find the the right thing that you thought would complement what the management team and you guys as founders needed?
This is exactly. This is either going to be a therapy session for you or me. So I would say that it's a really tough tough situation, and I don't. I mean, it's anybody here and anybody in the world that is a product leader, or really anybody, any PM in a company where the CEO thinks that they know product is a really tough job. So I commend anybody who is willing to go along with that. I think that the probably anything that I've done well in this area or evolved over time only has come with just like growing up as a manager, as somebody who understands like what things do you delegate, which things do you get to make decisions on, which things do you want the team to come up with ideas on, which things am I going to sort of inject my ideas into a brainstorm. And so there's a lot of sort of just honing and nuance around, I'll give you a really, really small example that even 3 months ago, I had to be optimizing 13 years in, is our chief product officer, G2 and I, he was saying, hey, when, it's great that I will run into a whole bunch of things in the product, a bunch of features that I want, and I'll just shoot off emails and about those things. And so obviously, like it's like 1:15 in the morning, and you get an email about some feature that I want, and G2 was super clear and helpful in saying, hey, when you do this, this is it's kind of great that you're doing this, / not, but when you do it, maybe just say, this is just an issue I'm running into. Don't reprioritize your entire product roadmap because of this, but take into account as you're thinking through this domain. Because it's sort of, I think the perspective is like I'm telling people that we have to go do this as the very next thing, and I think it's a natural response to say, okay, the CEO wants this thing, we have to go work on it. So it's like 100 things like that over time. It's in a meeting and being really clear that if I make, I have an opinion on a design that we're kind of clear that this is just a strong opinion. We don't have to do it this way, and then I certainly pray on my end that they do it that way. But it's not like a hard requirement, like your job is measured by this decision. So it's a bunch of that. It's making sure that I recuse myself from certain kinds of meetings and processes, so I'm not sort of like hovering like everywhere. I do one form of hovering, which is a very bad habit. But I sit with the design team, so I do hover around designs. And we got, a lot of people are probably very scared right now. Yeah.
He's a good designer. So when I was there, he was busting out Photoshop and doing the logos and stuff like that. You're a good designer.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. But there's nothing worse than somebody who thinks they're a good designer, though, hovering around designers. So you might, yeah. So I don't think anybody likes it, but I need it. So I basically just have a general theory that it's not that much of a theory, but to me it's like I have a deep paranoia, which is like that like ultimately all of the action it comes down to design. That's where you're going to see like where are we going as a company? Like where is our vision playing out? So I just have to it's just this deep paranoia that like if that sort of like goes farther away, like 3 rows away from me, I won't be able to see what's happening, so I just lodge myself right there. Yeah.
So we're gonna just take 2 more questions, and
Sorry,
that's it.
I'll try and be shorter.
So the pressure's on. It better be good questions here. So okay, so we're gonna take one here, and then Matali.
I had a quick follow-up. So when you hire product leaders, you look for folks who compliment you, or folks who just think
the exact same way.
Like you, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I think that I think that the challenge with this is like it's hard to give any generic advice because there's a 1,000 permutations you run into. Like you might have somebody that thinks totally different than you, but you've got such a great stylistic interpersonal relationship that can work. And there are some people that think exactly the same way as you, but actually that like self-combusts because like you're too similar. So I think in general you want somebody that is able to solve a bunch of things that you can't solve or don't solve. So in my case, it's somebody who's going to be really operational. It's going to be somebody who's really gone on the strategy side long term. So that part is aligned, hopefully. No company could survive if with a product-oriented CEO and a product leader that was fundamentally trying to build something different. Like that will not work whatsoever. But a product leader that brings in different perspectives, different backgrounds, different ideas, different types of challenging viewpoints, that's necessary for probably a successful company, unless somehow the CEO just had the perfect vision on everything. So I think you want enough of challenging, enough pushback, enough sort of new ideas, but there has to be a fundamental shared vision of like where the company's going, where the product is going, because the moment that starts to deviate more than 5 or 10%, you start to see disproportionate impact ripple through the company, and that's obviously incredibly dangerous.
Okay, last question. How do you spend your time? Like, what's your percentage of time on which priority that you spend on? And then a follow-up question to recruiting is just as you've grown larger and you're no longer the sexy, cool, out to crush the incumbents company, like how hard does recruiting...
I'm glad that you think that we were sexy and cool at some point, so I appreciate that. Yeah. Yes.
I was one of the early users. But how hard is it to recruit talent?
Yeah.
And I don't mean just product leaders, and retain them.
Yeah. I'm sorry, what was the first part of the question?
How do you split your own time?
Yeah.
What do you focus on?
So my time is, there's a bunch of call it like public company CEO tasks, which is like, investor stuff and operating reviews and those kind of things. That's probably 10% of my time, 10 to 15% of my time. And then the other probably 3 or 4 big buckets are product. So strategy reviews, long-term, short-term design reviews, just the random sort of brainstorms that we find ourselves in. So that's probably about a third or fourth of my time. Another third with customers, and then a bunch on sort of marketing, brand, a bunch on the marketing side as well. So those are probably the 3 or 4 big buckets where my time is split. And then in terms of recruiting, I think I do think it's helpful if your company. So this is sort of us, hopefully, but I think it's helpful if your company has a like what is your unique kind of value proposition to a person. And so our unique value proposition is that we are going to be at least attempting to build consumer like software, but to solve really, really hard, complex enterprise problems. So if you get excited about life sciences and research in the drug development space, or how certain government agencies collaborate, or how consumer brands launch product campaigns, and you want to build software to solve those problems, but you don't want to sacrifice on the kind of consumer instincts that you might get at a more consumer company, then hopefully we're a place that is like a really good sweet spot for you. So I think it's really good to kind of know like what is it's sort of like your business model but applied to a person. It's like, so it's in our case it's we want to build consumer grade software for the enterprise, which means that there's going to be a really, really specific kind of high caliber person that wants to do that also, and you just have to find wherever that talent is. And I think everybody has the ability. Necessarily if your company is going to succeed, you're going to have something unique about the company, which then translates to unique about the product management role, because you're ultimately delivering whatever that is. So I think having a deep alignment between whatever that is to the product function is super useful. That's at least what we try and do.
Well, sounds like Box is a great place for product people to work. Yeah.
If you want to be in meetings with me, totally. Yeah. So
not a designer, not so much. Designer, not so much, but product. Yeah.
Probably not.
Cool.
All right, cool. If you want somebody hovering around your desk, just like this, like watching your computer screen, like popping
on the
up.
Segway, right?
Yeah,
You're kind
on
of
the Segway.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. Cool.
Cool.
Awesome, guys. Well,
Thank
please
you.
join me in giving Aaron a big
Good to
round
see
of
you.
applause. Thanks,
Thank
bud.
you.